What is up, everyone? Welcome to the Occult Rejects. Coming at you this week with part two of the Orgones and Consciousness that I had Leon and Teresa join me in last week's episode. So today we're going to be going over more of that. I think when we kind of left it off last week, I did mention that we were going to get into the negative aspects of Orgon and no, however you say it, and cloud busting. Sorry, I had a brain fart for a second. So we got back Leon and Teresa, like I said earlier, to talk about that when it comes to Oregon. Teresa, since you're the co-host, would you like to let everybody know what's up with you in case this is the first time they ever came across you? And if this is the first time you ever listened to this show, I highly suggest to go back and listen to part one. That may help before you start listening to part two.
Okay.
But for people who don't know who you are yet, which I find hard to believe, would you like to let everybody know who you are and what your deal is in that amazing podcast you have?
Sure. Well, thank you for having me back on the Occult Rejects. I always love to co-host this show with you. I'm Teresa, and I have another podcast also usually co-hosted with you called The Spiritual Gangsters. So it's a great time. Lots of interesting chats, interesting guests, personal stories, like transformational experiences, things like that. So check it out if you have not on all the major podcast platforms, YouTube and Rumble.
Yes, very true.
Mm-hmm.
Definitely keep an eye out on the Rumble for that because we will be going live more often on that. So if you are not following us on Rumble, I highly suggest to do that. So there you go. And I did want to mention, you have an amazing producer for that show. You have to, next time you talk to that person, let them know they do a great job.
Right?
Yeah, amazing. She has the best producer for Spiritual Gangsters. Great
Just
work.
pat yourself on the back for that. Thanks for all you do.
Yeah. And now to our guest after the silly stuff. Leon, would you like to let everybody know like who you are, what your deal is, and plug anything that you want people to find that you've done?
Sure. Hi. Thanks for having me back for part two. And I'm Leon Southgate. I've been an orgone energy researcher for about 20 years. And I come from a family of psychotherapists, and I got my interest in orgone and orgonomy and Wilhelm Reich from my father, who had an interest in it. And I did. I'm an acupuncturist by trade, but really like to be a full-time researcher. So I do as much on the research as I can. And I did an academic study into acupuncture and orgone back in about 2000, which was based partly in the UK and partly, I did the experimental study in the US, and that's about me in a nutshell. And my main, I'm needing to get a new website up, but my blog is my main portal at the moment, which is leonsouthgate.blogspot.com. So all my links are there at the moment.
Yeah, I have about I think 5 links in there now for you. So
Yeah.
I do have I have your Twitter, I have your Psych Orgon site, Leon Southgate, his blog spot, his YouTube, and a web archive. I have all the links in the bottom now, so definitely check those out after the show if you found this interesting.
Oh, super! Yeah, Psych Orgone's the main place for my main papers. It's probably the main the main orgone journal to publish sort of biophysical stuff. So all my recent stuff is there.
Very well.
The longer articles.
Very good. So I guess honestly, I'm just going to put it this way. If you don't know what the hell Orgone is, go back to the first episode. I don't know if I really want to, go over all that for the first
Sure.
people people up. But I know, you were going to go into cloud busting or the negative aspects of orgone. Since this is your topic and I don't know anything really about it, I guess however you want to present that, wherever you want to start. I know you say they both kind of go hand in hand, so I
Mm,
guess start the best way you can explain that to the listeners.
sure. Well, I'll start with splitting orgone into three, because orgone is it's it's just another word for life force or chi or prana. Um, and the difference, I guess, with Reich was he documented how that life force can be seen scientifically in a lot of different areas. Like Tesla documented life force, how it interacts with electricity, and Mesmer documented life force, how it interacts with the mind, and there's other people documented how it interacts with biology, but Reich was the only one who really documented how it interacts in every field pretty much, and that's one of the reasons I find him so compelling. But the this life force can be broken down into three types. Most people think there's only two types, like positive orgone and negative orgone, which sometimes it gets the abbreviation DOR for deadly orgone, uh, and um, some occasionally people are called the positive side of it, positive orgone, but generally just orgone. But the positive side of orgone splits into two. There's energized orgone, which uh, is called Oronor, after Reich's experiments with orgone and nuclear materials. Because there's a secret about nuclear materials. There's two reasons they suppress it. One of the reasons is that it has such an energizing effect on life force, so that that you can energize life force into a positive, um, very vibrant state. And so Oronor I use as a kind of catch-all term for energized orgone. So you got orgone in its sleepy state or just quiescent state in nature and just gently flowing. You got
I love that you said
orgone.
acquiescent. That's a really good way to put it.
Yeah, it's a lovely word, isn't it? And then you got energized orgone or oronor, which is where free energy comes in, um, and where sort of, because when orgone gets very excited, it creates electrical particles, uh, charged particles, and and then
Would you say real quick? I just want to ask. Would you say humans do that themselves in general?
yeah, yeah, the
Could
one
that
of
be the
the
consciousness that's doing that?
yeah, yeah, consciousness can excite orgone fields too, and the um, that Uri Geller used to be able to excite Geiger counters, and his team thought that it was just Uri Geller's mind interacting with the mechanism of the device. But I think it's because Uri Geller could create Oronor with his body or his mind. So the I found it in some obscure book on pyramids from the 70s or 80s, but they definitely noted an effect on Geiger counters that Uri Geller had.
Do you think
So
like EMF detectors could pick stuff up like that?
yeah, I mean the whole kind of paranormal field, they're really missing a very useful research tool in the Geiger counter, because
I'm gonna keep that in mind.
wherever you get paranormal phenomena, you get raised particles, and it's actually from the Oronor, really, rather than the electrical effects in paranormal stuff is more a side effect. The main energy behind paranormal phenomena, I believe, is Oronor.
Do you think that has to do with like sometimes when they show? I'm sorry to be like going off on this now, but
It's
do you
all
think
right.
that could be like when they show like, oh, the camera just died or this just died? Do you think that could be what's doing it?
Yeah,
Instead
definitely.
of like this ghost sucking the life out of that so it could tell Zach to go fuck off.
Yeah,
You know?
yeah, yeah, definitely. Because the because the ghost is maybe in a paranormal dimension or realm, and has a lot of is directing life energy or um, life force and electrical energies that are kind of antagonistic. So a life force field can take over an electrical field. Like I've got a friend who's kind of, he's not skeptical, but he's from a kind of um, traditional background, and he doesn't tend to believe in spiritual stuff. And he got a text from his mum who passed away, that like his mum actually took over his phone, the whole the whole the whole the whole screen, and sent him a message. And it the well, it's a bit complicated to break it all down, but
Just
but
turning
ba-
into X-Files stuff right here now.
yeah. Well, basically, orgone is a pre-atomic energy, like, because you got before particles, and electricity is a post-atomic energy. So uh, the they kind of act antagonistic. You can get one from the other. Like um, you can use post-atomic energies to gently build up pre-atomic energies, like in electro agriculture, where you put electricity around plants, and it can work the other way, um, where a pre-atomic field can take over an electrical field, like my friend with his message from with his text message from the beyond. But yeah, but to go back to that triad, you got the the quiet, natural, relaxed orgone. You got Oronor, the excited orgone, and then you got the deadly orgone or door, which is uh, either the excited orgone or the quiescent orgone that's died and becomes stuck and stagnant. So there's different. The normal orgone's usually blue, or those types of colors. And then energized orgone can be purpley, red, um, very sort of any strong, vibrant colors. And door or deadly orgones usually browny black, sort of stagnant type colors. Um, and the uh, uh, asking how about Cloudbusters is very connected to to Door. So that it was because of Door that Wright discovered cloud busting. So the two are very interconnected. Um, actually, it's connected to Oronor as well, but that's another story a bit later on. But yeah. So do you want to go to cloud busting?
Yeah.
I just have one question. So, like, how would you measure the color of the orgone? Like, how do you determine that?
Mostly visually, because when Wright did the Oronor experiment in 1951, roughly, he he could see very strong colors coming out of the room, and sometimes when you see a very strong orgone environment. You can see like a blue haze over the mountains.
Ooh.
You know what's
And
weird? I think Aleister Crowley supposedly claims when he did a ritual inside the pyramids, the room glowed blue.
yeah, yeah, that wouldn't surprise me at all. And
Uh,
the there's a kind of connection between Aleister Crowley and orgonomy. It's a bit of a um, there was a
the fuck is it?
Dang.
there was a guy called Israel Regardie, I think.
Oh yeah, it was his buddy that.
Yeah, but yeah, it's not an area I know a lot about, but plutonium too apparently glows blue before
Oh,
it explodes. So
Is that what that wasn't you? Wait, that wasn't used in Back to the Future, was it?
it might be
I don't know.
the
Isn't that the stuff that he robbed from the other guys that tried to kill him in the first one?
it could well be there. I mean, they put all sorts of references in
Well,
sci-fi.
because of that, the reason I'm bringing that up is because I have been like thinking about covering Back to the Future. So like it did remind me of it, but like just real quick, and the reason why I even question that movie in itself, I've explained before, like if magic is actually kind of going back into the past in spirit, coming back to your body technically would be going back to the future from when you were in spirit. Like if I'm going back into the past and becoming spirit, for me to go back to my body, I technically have to go back to the future now.
Yeah, it's bizarre, isn't it? Like I've heard people say that you could get reincarnated into past historical epochs, which is something I find hard to get my head around. But time is a very fluid thing. Um, it's and
All right, so the
uh,
colors. I'm sorry, I totally got you. Totally got you.
Well, for the colors, like Leon, do you need an instrument to observe that, or just with
Yeah,
your naked eye?
yeah,
just with your naked eye.
Oh,
Um,
wow.
uh, I mean, the main measurements in orgonomy and the study of orgone in the past have been temperature, Geiger counters, and visual, just um, sensory information.
And what
Uh,
color did you say again? I'm sorry.
Blue is the main color for orgone. In
Mm.
Oh,
fact, no, I've just
would that
remembered
be
there
like?
is
I'm
a
just wondering, like, is that why we think the sky's blue?
yeah that's why Reich thought the sky was blue, not
Oh,
because of particular sort of light diffraction qualities, but actually because the orgone is blue.
it's made
The,
of blue.
the
Yeah.
yeah, the
Wow.
same with the ocean,
Yeah.
and I, that was one of the observations with how Wright discovered orgone in the first place. Was he was looking down the a microscope at material that he'd heated in water, sand and food, and one of there was a tiny little vesicle which he called a bion, about smaller than a bacteria but larger than viruses, about or or whatever those entities are, uh, and the like about the size of half a dozen. Uh, what's the term they use in terrain theory? Um, uh, exosomes,
Yeah, it's
like
exosomes. Yeah.
uh, maybe half a dozen exosomes in size, uh, or a quarter of a bacteria, and these tiny little vesicles glowed blue. Um, and so that was one of the first observations in orgonomy, and it gave Wright conjunctivitis in his microscope eye. The the uh, especially the sand packet bions, or or what Wright called the sapper bions, because I think because they've been charged by the sun for centuries on a beach, where when they were accidentally cooked, they turned into very strong bions, and the blue they let off a blue orgone, a blue energy glow, and that was the beginning of the whole process of discovering orgone. That would have been in the 1930s, I think, early 1930s in Europe. The
Interesting.
Or maybe even before.
It's making me think about the blue table in Twin Peaks now.
Mm,
Well, I was thinking of like the Northern Lights. I'm like, I wonder if that's
yeah.
a certain type of orgone, and
Mm,
that's why we see it green.
I was wondering if that's like, that's why I had asked before, like why, what colors, because I was thinking you said more than blue. I don't know why. Because I was even thinking, like, is that why sometimes, like, in the mornings we might see like the scarlet sky, instead of the blue? I was like, could that just be changes in the work in the atmosphere?
yeah, yeah, yeah. It could be. Blue's the base color. I think that's partly why some companies that they'll if like I think BMW has their top range is the blue series, and
Mm.
I think that's because they know that blue's the highest color in terms of of this dimension or reality.
That's hence.
Mm.
Well, it's most people's favorite color too, right?
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, yeah. It's
Mm-hmm.
always been mine as well. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So,
Yeah, I use blue a lot.
mm,
Nice, that's interesting.
Mm-hmm.
Did you have any other questions, Teresa? That was a good one. So, like, you
No.
you can just see the colors, by sight. Now, I'm assuming,
yeah,
does the color have to do with a vibrational rate itself too?
I guess so. I don't think anybody's ever tested the vibrational rates of orgone.
Oh.
Um, I mean, sometimes I've picked up that there's a device called Blue Shield that um, that supposedly gives out a subtle energy field that helps people with electrosensitivity. And uh, I used an orgone meter on the Blue Shield device, and if I set the orgone meter to its most sensitive setting, I could pick up a frequency from the Blue Shield device, but it was very subtle. Um, but the Russians will have investigated that because they they call uh, well, their name for orgone is torsion fields, and and the Soviets were aware of orgone and kept close track of it from the 1940s. They ordered all of Reich's books, and they had orgone accumulators in the Soviet Union, um, and then they had some sophisticated devices for measuring frequency, and so I'm sure there'd be a sophisticated frequency devices in Russia.
That's
But
interesting.
as far as I know, there's not much um, uh, in the Western literature on on frequency and orgone. But so that's a whole area to be explored, I think.
Sounds like. I actually thought of one more question. Sorry, before we move on to cloud busting.
No, go for it.
Leon, do you know if there are places in the world where there's more of the Orinor, like the energized orgone, and conversely, like more places with the door, like negative?
Yeah, I was just reading an old journal by a guy called Jeremy Eden this week,
Hmm.
and he was did a lot of cloud busting back in the late 70s, early 80s, and some of his descriptions of America in the late 70s, the door problem was much worse than it is now.
Hmm.
Um, and there, any environment, particularly deserts, if if um, if an environment is dying and the energy isn't moving, then that's a kind of door environment.
Oh, interesting.
And an environment where the energy's sparkling and you can see things with a lot of clarity. Like I've noticed when I've done some uh, work with cloud busting myself, or an energized form of cloud busting, um, the, the the environment sparkles more. So if there's a lack of sparkle in the environment and you can't see very far, and the trees are drooping, and there's a kind of brownness to the vegetation, and that lack of clarity, then that would be a doorish environment. Or it's a bit like smog. Smog it had borderlines with door, because some of what is called smog is actually door. It's not just particulates. It's actually a, a kind of stuck energy. In terms of where it is in the world, it can vary a lot, because there's desert regions where it's been really doorish. I mean, probably if you wanted to find a really doorish environment now, perhaps over like Beijing in the summer, or Mexico City, somewhere like that, and a very sparkling uh, orgone, natural orgone environment, perhaps sort of um, somewhere in South America, or parts of Europe, Croatia or Switzerland, or, and then an Orinor environment. So sometimes Orinor environments look very um, almost hard. There's like a blue, hard look to the sky, like everything's overcharged. So sometimes after um, uh, uh, after supposed nuclear tests, I don't. There has been reported that the sky has had that very like Orinor look, in of like hard, super glassy blue, um, cloudless kind of look. And I've seen that with when uh, when you turn a cloudbuster into an energized cloudbuster. Wright called it a space gun, and it works a bit differently to a cloudbuster, I think. But there sometimes you get a very like a crystally, sparkly look to the sky. Uh, so so there is quite a difference. And back in the 70s, I think a lot of environments were really doorish. But I think perhaps a combination of people's consciousness and people's work on the ground. There's quite a lot of cloud busting going on in places around the world that it certainly seems to be a less doorish now, compared to the reports I've read from the 70s. Yeah,
So
there's
something
quite.
changed, obviously, right? You're saying?
What's that? Sorry.
So something has definitely changed in that time.
Yeah, I think so. Mm.
I wonder if 5G has anything to do with that. Just
Yeah,
like exciting
How
the particles, like in the atmosphere.
yeah. 5G had definitely upset the orgone field, because the 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 that'd be a very strong post-atomic energy field, and the post-atomic and pre-atomic fields are quite antagonistic. The you get one from the other, but the two naturally fight. It's like putting a tiger and a sheep in a cage. Uh, they don't naturally get on. So that's why, like I've noticed, like teenagers, they don't believe you when you say that the electrical fields aren't good for them. But I know they'll hold a phone all day in their hand or be on Wi-Fi on a laptop all day, and at the end of the day they feel really anxious.
Yeah.
And like I'll say, well, why don't you try hardwiring that or getting rid of the Wi-Fi, and they'll feel better at the end of the day. It does, so that them holding that EMF device in their hands has upset their orgone field. The two do interact.
That's interesting.
For sure.
So did you want to go into the cloud busting?
Yes.
Well, it all started about 1940.
And now you wait. And real quick, I did want to go back to something I caught you
Sure.
saying before. Now you actually have like done these experiments yourself, because I think you mentioned something about like you trying to do your own like cloud busting.
Well, I'm probably the only person I know of who's done any experiments into the space gun, apart from Reich, and as well as being the only person to repeat the Oronor experiments.
You have like some like mad scientist lab in your house?
Yeah, but
It's
and-
fucking wild. That's
but for in terms of cloud busting, I've not done a lot in that area. The main, well, one of the main people is James DeMeo, who did a lot of work in cloud busting. He actually did an MA at Kansas University looking into cloud busters, and because it was the late 70s, he got away with it. They'd never allow it now. And then he tried to do a PhD in cloud busting, and that was stamped on by the government. But yeah, my main area has been orgone and acupuncture, and then orgone and consciousness. But because consciousness is a really high energy field, I tried to create the highest orgone charge I could, and so that involved Oronor, and then because Oronor is associated with cloud busting, the energized cloud busting, that kind of got me interested or got me to work on a kind of modification of the space gun, which is a energized cloud buster. So there's other people who are the main people in cloud busting, but I've had a connection with the space gun.
that's amazing.
Yeah.
Wow. All right. So
It's funny.
yeah.
But it kind of goes back to about 1940, the cloud busters. Oh, did you want to go into that now?
Yeah. Sure.
Well, Reich had started off. I think he discovered the bions and the orgone energy in Europe, and then he was living in Oslo for a while, where he was getting hounded by the psychiatrists over there. So he got an offer to stay in New York. So he went over and settled in America, where until the communists found out about him in the early 50s, I think it was, or late 40s. He had a pretty good time in America, and that he wasn't too obstructed until that point. But he constructed he built a laboratories and research facility in Maine, north of New York, and established a place called Orgonon, which still exists to this day. It's like a museum now.
What?
They do some good work in that they've republished Contact with Space and some other books that were quite rare. Uh, I've got a photocopied version of Contact with Space, which talks about his last years and the that's. But there's a lovely new version of it that the Wilhelm Museum's published. But there's a lake near there called Moose Lukmiguntik Lake, and Reich in about 1940 was just watching the lake, and he happened to have a tube, and he pointed I think he's got slightly psychic sight, I think, Reich, or he could see energy fields, um, which I can to a degree too. When you spend a lot of time working with orgone, it kind of changes your sight. You kind of move from seeing matter more to seeing energy more in a way. And I think Reich naturally had this ability, and he was playing with this tube. He could see the orgone waves above the lake, which probably would have been a lighter blue shimmer over the deeper blue of the water. And he pointed the tube at the energy waves and saw that the waves moved when he pointed the tube. So in the back of his mind, he knew that tubes had an effect on orgone. And so many years passed, well, nearly just over a decade passed, and he did the Oronor experiment at the end of 1950, beginning of 1951, and where he took a really strong orgone energy room and put a milligram of radium in an orgone box inside an orgone room, and the orgone just went crazy and went all purple and all sorts of different effects, and got really overcharged and made people ill and set Geiger counters going for
That's really interesting.
all the way up the coast. And so this experiment kind of got out of control, and after the energy calmed down, they dismantled the orgone room and tried to clear the energy, and they couldn't clear
what's
it.
what's the number for radium, real quick, if you don't mind me asking?
I'm not sure of the chemical number for radium. I know.
All right. Radium is a chemical element with the symbol Ra, Ra, and the atomic number is 88.
Oh, come on.
Really, is it 88? That's
Wow.
interesting.
This totally goes along with the disruption of that
Mm.
the text number that goes along with Trump. He has totally caused a disruption since he's come into the fucking picture.
I mean, it maybe indicates nuclear war is upon us.
Well, Trump is a 44, isn't he? Was he the 44th president?
No, 45th, I think.
45th, right? Oh,
yeah, 45th,
yeah. Because I in some of my experiments with
but 44 also goes for how much Elon Musk bought Twitter for.
Oh, that's
right. Because I've been getting a lot of 8s with the orgone device in some of my research, and that's 4 plus 4. I didn't know that about radium.
Yeah. Well, me and her were talking before, and I mean, we've said it multiple times. 8 and 4s are popping up all over the place, or versions of it. A lot of it.
8s and 4s.
Yes.
Yeah. Oh, that reminds me that water language. I want to look more into that. The on the that AI Jesus show you did with
yes, with Giant. Yeah, that was wild, fun stuff.
So going back to Orgonon, he had this kind of emergency after the Oronor experiment, and he got the door clouds. So over there were these black clouds that hung over the laboratory, and they didn't go anywhere else. They didn't go even to the next town. They just hung over the lab, and like the other clouds would move, and these would stay, and they had a really negative effect on. It was a very Dorish environment because the Orgona got really excited and then died or got stuck. So you had dead and dying trees, and even the rocks were affected. The rocks were turning into a blackish brown substance that Wright called melanor, um, and so the main thing that inspired the cloudbusters were these door clouds that just wouldn't go, and so it made the a combination between the door clouds um, and the effects of the Oronor experiment made the laboratory unusable pretty much, except for a few hours at a time. So Reich had an idea to. He thought, well, I'm going to have to try and remove these clouds some way, and he remembered from back to 1940 that tubes will affect orgone at a distance, or so, and he knew from his prior research that Dor is very water hungry. That's partly why it has negative effects on people's bodies, because the energy itself craves water, and it craves to get moving again. So, and water is a super substance. It does so many different things, and one of the things it does is it attracts orgone, and it anchors orgone much more strongly than any other substance. So it, Reich Reich knew that tubes affect the flow of orgone at a distance, and he knew that water attracts orgone stronger than anything else. So, so he put those two things together, and that's how he came up with the cloudbuster. So I think at first he just got a long metal tube and grounded it into water, and pointed it at the clouds, at the door clouds over above the organon, and he saw that had an effect. So then he went and got um, five or six. I think it was five, about six to about. I think they were about. They were somewhere between 6 and 10 foot. I think maybe 8 or 9 foot long pipes. He must have just had on the premises, and he bundled them together. Got some coax cable and connected it into a pond or a lake on the property, and pointed it at the door clouds. And there was one of the, well, I think Dr. Baker was with him. He had a group of doctors and psychiatrists who um, worked with him on the therapeutic side of his work, and one of them was there with him, and he saw 5 holes punched into the door cloud, and that was the start of the cloud busting.
That's so interesting, Leon. Do you know what metal the tubes were made of?
The tubes themselves,
Mm-hmm.
they can be made of any metal pretty much.
Oh,
I think the main the metal that Reich was using would have been steel.
okay.
But it'll work with steel's probably preferable, but it'll work with copper or any metal really. Uh,
Interesting. I'm wondering if I have the visual right because I'm trying to like make a picture in my mind by what you're describing.
mm,
So is it like a pool of water and like the bottom of the tubes are in the water and then they're directed at the cloud you want to bust,
yeah,
basically?
it will work like that, but
Okay.
the the uh, the the developed Cloudbuster had a series of half a dozen 9 to 12 foot long tubes. It looked like something off of. In fact, I've just watched a 1950s movie that had a. It was produced at the same time as it was the Earth versus the flying saucers from 1957,
Nice.
and I think that they based their device on there from the Cloudbuster, but because they had a similar. Reich used to have his Cloudbuster on the back of a truck, and have a big like fireman's handle to move it round,
Oh wow.
and so it looked a bit like it looked like some kind of space cannon, or uh, so that there'd
Those-
be um, half a dozen like 9 foot long, 9 to 12 foot long pipes uh, uh, mounted on a device that can move around, and then at the bottom of the pipes, one end of the pipes is open, and the other pipe end of the pipes would be closed, and then the bottom end of the pipes will be connected to a thick cable, and then that cable gets grounded into water.
Oh, the cable.
There is other ways of people have adapted the Cloudbusters in different ways. Some people have just even put tubes into the ground in Africa, um, and that's worked. Um, and but the main the main device that Reich used was looked a bit like a sort of something out of World War II, really.
That's so
It's like those
fascinating.
are the guns that they have on like fucking Star Wars.
Yeah,
You know, like those guns that are like when they're sitting in that thing swiveling all over the place. It's just a cloudbuster.
yeah. Well, it was really bizarre watching this movie from 1957, because the Reich would have been in prison at that point, and they used the same vehicle that Reich would have mounted his Cloudbuster on, or a pretty similar type of vehicle, and they even had the same handle for turning the Cloudbuster array around. Although in the movie they've got a satellite dish and a large tube and then an inner tube, and that wasn't how the Cloudbuster looked. Kate Bush's video, the Cloudbuster video, that's got a device in it that looks similar to what they've. It looks a bit more technical than what the Cloudbuster actually looked like. I've probably got a picture here that I can show.
All of us are gonna YouTube her music
Yeah.
video as soon as this is over. We're all like, ooh.
Gonna get it increase the history.
I've always loved that song though.
You know what I wanted to ask you
Yeah,
real quick while you're looking at this, Leon, just to go
yeah.
back to what you said about paranormal activity and stuff
Mm.
in the beginning. Now, it caught my interest when you said Orgone attracts to water like naturally the best.
Yeah, yeah. Water is the strongest attractor for orgone.
Mm.
And funny enough, I mean, water might be physically condensed orgone, because
I've said that before. I question if water is like condensed consciousness.
Oh wow.
It's crazy.
yeah, I think it actually literally is, because uh, orgone is the
We have our
base.
best ideas in the shower.
Yeah.
We
Well,
always feel good when we're near water,
Yeah.
right? Feel better.
yeah.
Mhm.
Well, it's like the eureka moment in the bath, and the but
Yes.
I think orgone literally compresses into water, excites intercharged particles, and geometric shapes change kind of the flow, or the mind of orgone. And the one time there was, I mean, when you point a cloudbuster at the sky, it kind of contracts the orgone into one area of the sky, and then whenever you get a contraction of the orgone, the water moisture follows. But I think you can actually create virgin water, as it were, because in one of Reich's experiments in the Oronor, after the Oronor experiments, he buried the radium needles. He put it into a lead container that the radium needles had come in. It was only 1 milligram of radium. It's not a huge amount, but it had very strong effects after it was orgone charged. But that 1 milligram of radium, like you could have that milligram of radium quite safely in your room, like unshielded, not a dangerous amount. But like you wouldn't want to sleep with it under your pillow, but like
Getting a little too
not
personal now.
so after it had been orgone charged, it had become really strong and done had strange effects on the Geiger counter and stuff. But
See, that was kind of why I wanted to ask you about the water real quick. Is that,
yeah,
like, have you ever heard that sometimes running water and like maybe certain rocks or minerals can cause these paranormal effects at
oh
places?
yeah,
So I'm wondering, like, could it be like the running orgone with the water?
yeah, it could definitely, because the when he when he put the radium in this, it was in a sealed container with grease around the top, so there's no way anything was getting into that. And then that was put inside a lead safe, and the whole thing was buried. And then when they opened the inner container, it had water in it, or a kind of liquid. So I think that liquid was literally created. I think it probably was water, but it was created literally just from energy, like not condensed from the environment. Um, so, so
Do you
water.
think that's what evaporation could be?
Well, in the metal container, there's nothing that could have evaporated.
Yeah, no, but I'm saying like evaporation. Like, do you think that maybe it could be like the orgone separating from itself back into, like, not so condensed?
It could be, because like some strange things can happen when with cloudbusters. Like there's been this phenomena of desert greening, where I think that's been seen in a number of countries. It's actually quite well documented overall scientifically. Cloud busting, the desert greening happens without sort of overt water. You're on a cloud busting operation over a number of days. Sometimes the desert starts to green without actually raining. I've got a picture here of one. I don't know if that will come up.
Right there. Okay.
Yeah, and then
Kind of looks like a tube sticking out of the ground. That's it.
yeah, I mean that's not a very good picture, but it's easy to find online. The and
Well, now, real quick, if you don't mind me asking, like, what's your setup?
well, um,
Hey, we want to see it. Take us to the secret lab, Leon.
sure. Well, if you go to Psych Orgone and look up my papers, you can see pictures of my setup, and it's basically because I've not got the space for a whole orgone room. I created the equivalent by getting a human-sized orgone accumulator, and then I this was over many years, and the orgone for the orgone acupuncture experiments, I had like a mini accumulator that would connect to acupuncture points. So I had like 3 or 4 mini accumulators, and so I put them inside the big accumulator, and then I put metal against the back. I put some radiators behind the cabinet, and then a load of crystals and other things inside, and orgone tubes. So I think I had about a dozen different orgone devices inside one kind of 6 foot by 3 foot orgone box. So the
We got
chart.
that 369 code going on now.
Oh yeah.
Fibonacci. Yeah.
Well, somebody was just saying you got to run Jamachi on Leon as a joke. And I'm like, damn, now he's throwing out the 369. Maybe I should.
Oh, that's funny.
Well, so the energy off the box was really high, and then I then stimulated the box with a little bit of radioactive material, which was just some smoke alarms, a little bit of because they contain a bit of americium in them, and then the space gun bit was I just got some scaffolding pipes, and I actually got the idea because I had the whole Oronor again. It was kind of accidental a bit like Reich's work at first, in that I had originally I had the box set up in a garage that was next to a little side road, and a scaffolding truck parked next to the garage, and and it had two long scaffolding pipes that were pointed up at a cloud, and I noticed that the cloud seemed to be dissipating, and I thought, well, I wonder if the Oronor energy in the box is going through the pipes on the truck and affecting the cloud. So I got some scaffolding pipes and put them. I'd opened the box up and put the scaffolding pipes next to the box, and it would seem to affect the environment. It was slower than like Reich's space gun was a full-sized cloudbuster with a whole milligram of orgone charged radium placed next to it, whereas mine was I toned Reich's experiments down by maybe 1,000-fold and used less radioactivity, and the tubes were smaller, so it seemed to be a slower process, but similar to what Reich had mentioned, like the sparkle would increase in the environment and clouds would get less where it was pointed. And my friend and researcher in Italy, he analyzed the particulate data, and he found that when the space gun was put up, the pollution particulates went down in the region. So I'm pretty convinced that it does something to the environment, and it's not as versatile a thing as the Cloudbuster, and I guess it's a space gun type device, and not as strong as Reich's, but it seems to dry out the atmosphere, make it more sparkling, and it seems to head the environment to being sort of sunnier, whereas cloud busting can be used both to create clouds and to dissipate them, depending where you point the tubes.
As well, so like when you're doing this stuff, you can actually watch yourself create a cloud and then just get rid of it.
I guess it would be a little bit more.
Or like, do you create the cloud and it just stays there, or does it just kind of like go off?
It's kind of more like a good analogy would be acupuncture, like rather than creating something from scratch or dissipating something from scratch. You're more kind of it's like environmental acupuncture. You're kind of nudging the environment in certain ways. Like a lot of the early cloud busting efforts were made to clear door blockages. Like there'd be a blockage of door over the mountains, and you might have 2 or 3 cloudbusters that are pointed at increase it, because the orgone energy streams around the planet from west to east, and that there's orgone streams across continents. And sometimes if you get a line of door, it will block the orgone streams, and then they can't bring water. So a lot of the cloud busting operations in the 70s and 80s, and were aimed at breaking down these door blockages. So it's more like it's like an environmental therapy, really.
Mm.
And you have to be quite careful that you don't push the environment too much in one direction or another, because
So
you can.
you could probably seriously manipulate weather then with Oregon. Right?
Yeah, I mean, twice a hurricane has been steered. The Hurricane Dora in um, in '67, and Hurricane Edna in 1954 were steered. Reich steered a hurricane and stopped. Like a guy that was chucked in prison and left to rot. He saved New York from a hurricane, and with a cloud busting operation. And one of his uh, one of his students.
That's like a documented, known thing.
Yeah, that's all documented in the.
That's like accepted in the science world. That's not considered like a conspiracy, crazy idea.
It won't be accepted that it was done with a cloudbuster, but the movement.
I'm not discrediting you. I'm just saying, like, in case people to look into.
Oh no, sure.
Like, how would you find that? No.
But you can. I mean, you could find it in 2 places in the orgone literature, because orgonomy is unique as an alternative science, in that it's got documented journals going from the 1940s up to now, and it has never not had journals. There's always been a group of doctors and researchers and lay people who've documented their work. So that it's documented in the orgone literature, but it should. The track of the hurricanes should be documented in the mainstream literature. So I wouldn't have thought there'd be any dispute as to where they tracked and when. But they were. I mean, they're very sneaky, the authorities, because in America there's a law requiring any weather modification to be registered with the government, any private attempts, and James DeMeo registered all his cloud busting work with the NOAA, National Oceanographic Association, and also another person who did a lot of cloud busting. I think it might have been Jeremy Eden. He documented a load of stuff with them, and they purposely lost DeMeo's documents, and they ignored Eden's documents. So I mean, that brings me to something that's little known even in orgonomy, is that not only do governments suppress their citizens knowing about orgone and ether and things, but they also suppress each other. Like at one point, the Israeli government took an interest in cloud busting, and the Americans in the, I think it's late 50s, the Americans wouldn't give Reich a visa to go to Israel, so that they could stop him communicating, and that they also
with other people doing it. Wow.
Yeah. So there was a pressure on another government took some interest in cloud busting, as well as the Israelis, the 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 Eritreans, next to small country next to Ethiopia, and they had some amazing results from Demio's cloud busting in, I think it was the 80s. They literally reversed a huge a huge kind of desertification process, and saved the country tens of millions in food imports, and Lake Nasser refilled up. And it was, I think, some American
So, like,
newspapers.
what did they actually do? What did they actually create enough clouds to actually be able to start agriculture? And
Yeah, they Demio went over to Eastern Africa with a team, and he had three large cloud busters at different points over Eritrea, and they reversed the kind of desert process for the whole of the Horn of Africa, and the weather improved spectacularly, and lakes filled up that had never been filled for centuries. I've one newspaper in the States described it as biblical, the changes in Eastern Africa. Snow's been seen in places that haven't snowed for centuries. Whole valleys have greened in Israel and across Africa, um, and in the US. Like sort of door emergencies have been reversed, um, and the uh, uh, the sort of kind of effects have been huge over like three cloudbusters, like three large cloudbusters, like truck mounted cloudbusters, can affect the weather over a third of a continent, maybe half a continent. So it's pretty powerful technology. Um, Really, I think Demio got quite worried at one point that he was worried that the I mean he did so much for ergonomy, but his work got ignored by governments and academia. But he was concerned that it, it was too powerful a knowledge to go out into the mainstream. Um, but there's no other way. I mean, our governments are mess with everything and are not exactly that caring. So we may as well know all there is to know.
you know what? I just want to ask you this question real quick. I'm probably going to ask it in a silly way, but I'm just like trying to get an idea of like what I'm thinking about here. Now, you're saying areas that I guess kind of,
Mm.
I guess, lacked orgone would be more of like desert area, or had a specific type, right? What was that? What were you
Yeah,
saying? Be more of a desert area? Was that negative?
yeah. I mean, the desert process. I mean, um,
Well, the right reason why I wanted to ask, and I'll finish asking, and then maybe you can make sense of what I'm trying to ask. I guess the best way I can think, let's say if like you had a vacuum
mm,
over the earth and you're going to suck up all the positive stuff, with the area that ends up becoming negative would all start to look like desolation and desert.
yeah, it could. In fact, Reich at a time thought the UFOs that often used to hang around the cloud busting activity, he thought they were hostile and giving out door. And Jeremy Eden thought the same. Um, I've sometimes wondered if those were not UFOs, but like Earthcraft that were not very well tuned and were giving out door rather because they weren't very well built. But
This is what I was wondering though, like this question could that, you know how like you're saying that like they were using the cloud busting to kind of like fix the
mm,
desert area and stuff like that.
mm,
Could the desert area be a side effect of sucking up the other stuff
yeah,
back over there? Let's
yeah,
say you're gonna harness all of this shit.
mm,
Could these surrounding areas that you're taking it from start to look like, you know,
yeah. I mean that Reich thought there was that there was a kind of, he compared deserts to a kind of cancer process of the earth. Like if you look at the Sahara It's like a huge swathe of the earth has died,
Mhm.
and that certainly at one point, Wright used to notice that when there was a lot of UFOs going, because they would be attracted by cloud busting, and that when there was a lot of UFOs traveling across where he was working, that the door seemed to increase. But
Maybe that's why they call it Project Bluebeam.
yeah,
Oh.
mm, yeah, and
Dang.
there was Project Blue Book as well, wasn't there? Uh, yeah,
Dang.
they know about the connection between blue and orgone, I'm sure.
Well, the desert thing struck me a little bit because I know they say, a lot of supernatural activity is associated with the desert, but also specifically like the Nephilim
Mm,
and like disembodied spirits that tend to be drawn to stay stuck in the desert.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah,
Mm.
I can
Why would it be in
imagine
the
that.
pyramids? They say that some
Hmm?
people think it could have been used to harness energy. Well, what if it harnessed everything out of that area? And that's why
Well,
that
Sucked
evidence.
it dry.
Yeah, or like shot it up into the sky. Now it's all gone, or went somewhere else.
well, it could be. You could harvest the orgone from the planet, but
Mm.
it also cosmically, the sun attracts orgone from the surroundings, and it becomes a condensation of orgone, and the because there's great galactic streams of orgone too. So the Earth would be in a galactic stream, and as because
Galactic
orgone
Federation.
goes from low to
Stop.
high, so the more orgone you've got, the
Keeping an eye
more
on the orgone up there.
yeah. Um,
Uh,
but yeah, there's definitely a connection between deserts and
yeah.
like deserts they can be high in Orinor in some ways. Like they can have a high Orinor charge, which might explain the paranormal aspect.
Hmm.
But so if a desert was very alive looking, it might have a high Orinor charge, or was very sparkly. But if it looked kind of dead and brownish, and then it'd be more door. But I'd imagine the sparkly high energy thing would be more the paranormal end.
Maybe that's why fucking Edward sparkles in the sun.
Oh, in Twilight, the vampire, he sparkles in the sun. Oh my god. Are you a teenage girl? That's
No, but I
funny.
was just thinking of sparkling and like, yeah, I pictured it. This
He's
gay
made of
vision.
orgone. There you
Yes,
go.
vampire sparkling.
Fuck. That's
Well,
funny.
when the pyramids were first built, it was lush in Egypt. Uh, Certainly, they know when the Sphinx was built, it was wet in that area. So, I mean, they would have been absolutely amazing. I mean, white marble covering these huge, it would have looked like something straight out of Star Trek. You had these white marble covered, huge, solid stone pyramids, maybe with a glowing crystal on the top, with waterways and the Sphinx nearby and surrounded by lush vegetation. We're seeing the very tail end of their kind of life, as it were. So that they would have been a lot more vibrant in the past. So maybe they were keeping the life force of the whole planet raised to try and help us through this period we're going through. Because they're I suspect they've been around longer than sort of the 4 or 5 thousand years we're told. More like 10,000, I would suspect. But they're orgone devices too.
You know, I was just thinking too. You mentioned before that you could easily just throw like a wire into water, right?
Yeah,
I mean, didn't the pyramids have like water running underneath them?
yeah, yeah. And they also had an Orinor effect because the granite is slightly radioactive. So you got that huge amount of well, the shape condenses orgone. Like pyramid shapes condense orgone, and the granite being slightly radioactive will have an Oronor effect, and just the sheer quantity of stone will attract the orgone, plus the water. And you've got different layers too. You've got the outer marble, and then the limestone, and different rocks in the center, and water underneath, as you say. Moving water too, I think it had. So yeah, it would have been a hugely strong orgone device. The same with Mesmer. Mesmer was an orgone scientist, because he built a device that was both a kind of cloudbuster and an orgone accumulator called the Baquet. And Tesla was the same. I mean, he believed that electricity was an effect of the ether, which is the orgone.
I was going to ask you about that, if you think electricity and orgone are like connected.
Yeah, definitely.
You might have said that in the first one too, but I just
yeah, charged particles are condensed orgone. That's like Henry Moray, who he had like a radioactive radio that had this crystal in it that kind of condensed the ether or the orgone field, and he could tune it into the environment, and he had one antenna going up into the sky and another into the ground, and that was all hushed up. I think that was well before World War II, and that was totally hushed up. And again, the Soviets knew about that. So a library book, Henry Moray based some of his work on a physicist, and that physicist's book was taken out of every US public library after Henry Moray's work. But he created what I call virgin electricity, because I think electricity, when you've generated it mechanically, is old and tired, and electricity, when it's come straight from the ether, it's like completely new, because you've compressed new ether into a new charged particle, and Moray experienced that, like when he connected his ether radio up, the light that he'd connect a bank of lights up to the ether radio, and it had a different quality. The light was more like sunlight, and not harsh, the same as you, like if you plug the same bank of lights into the house grid, it had a different feel. So I think you can get new water and new electricity too.
really weird. I was trying to think of like that stuff. I'm just wondering if like the maiden in aspect could even go back to virgin electricity, like you're talking about. You know, in occultism, that's really interesting.
Yeah.
There was something I was going to ask. Oh, the reason I think I had even asked you if you thought it could be associated with electricity. Helen had made a comment in the Bible, in the comment in the chat, asking about is there a Bible quote regarding there being water above and water below, and I started thinking about that, and then thinking about how like lightning and the lightning rods. Maybe some people don't know, but like lightning rods work because lightning actually comes out a little bit and meets the lightning from the sky.
Yeah.
So I was like wondering, is that so above and so below, of like kind of like orgons connecting and meeting with each other?
Yeah, I think there is an aspect to that, because the cloudbuster is like a lightning rod, and I think the cloudbuster sometimes pulls waters above to waters below, because orgone is like a form of water. And the space gun, I suspect, might work slightly differently, in that you got a very high charge at the bottom, and it kind of shoots charge up into the sky, which is why it has kind of slightly more oronizing effect, or makes the sky oronal clear.
Do you think it's possible you could turn a potato gun into a cloud busting gun too?
A potato gun.
Time, so I can cloud bust and shoot potatoes at people. Is it possible to make that?
I dare say so.
It sounds like the same thing. I just need a tube.
Perfect.
You can make it from anything, really. Just on the aspect of the Bible, that there is it reminds me of there's this thing about living water in the Bible, and I think that's kind of a, a reflection of orgone, because orgone is kind of like a water as energy, and it's alive and conscious. So it's quite a good description, living water.
Mm.
Uh, and there's various orgone devices in the Bible. Nebuchadnezzar had an orgone room, the gold lined room, and the Ark of the Covenant.
I was gonna ask you, is the Ark of the Covenant just an orgone box?
Yeah, yeah, it is. It's an Orinor box, because it was a gold lined box with wood and gold, and then um, the Roberto, the uh, my Italian research friend, he's done a quite a bit of work into finding what the the substance was that they put in the ark to activate it, and it sounds like it was a radioactive stone of some sort. Uh, so once that was in the uh, just roughly, I think the Ark of the Covenant was about 1,000 times stronger than Reich's setup, and in terms of Orinor. So it had been a huge amount of Orinor. You like if you had something the strength of the Ark now, you wouldn't be able to keep it in a town or anywhere. You'd need a mile space to put it in, um, uh,
Yeah.
which luckily they had the desert to keep it in. Uh,
Yeah, right.
uh, and the priests to like specifically look after it in certain ways. Otherwise, you'd get Orinor sickness if you went too near it. Um, and then Reich's setup, my setup was kind of 1,000 times less strong than Reich's, so I managed to repeat the Orinor experiment without having an Orinor emergency.
Well,
Um,
that's right.
just about. Um, so um, but yeah, there was um, a cloud that used to follow the ark around, and that would have been like an Orinor cloud, and the,
Oh, that's
there,
interesting. Hmm.
mm,
Oh, well, I wanted to ask you something before.
mm,
I forgot, and it came back to me. I know it's kind of going back about something you said earlier. Even like how you were saying how the government like suppresses and like hushes this stuff.
yeah.
Can you get government funding to study this stuff or to experiment with it?
Well, me and Demio were the only two people who've done a master's in orgonomy, or that focused on orgonomy, and I don't think you could do that now. I mean, I
Okay.
did mine into orgone and acupuncture in 2000, and Demio did his masters in cloud busting in 79. Um, but they wouldn't allow that now. But
Okay. The reason I ask is I know sometimes when they fund stuff, they're also like own the stuff as well too, or at least own the findings. So I was wondering like if
well, it's a very key question,
they did
um,
that at all.
because Demio tried to do a PhD in cloud busting, and he at that time I don't think the government followed academic uh, work as closely, and they but he applied for funding, and that's how the National Science Association got wind of him doing a cloud busting PhD, and then they reported it back, and someone either from there or elsewhere in the government leaned on the University of Kansas to stop the PhD going ahead. Um, so he ended up doing a PhD into the how deserts and Reich's theory of armoring affects cultures, and spreads out into the world. He called it Saharasia, um, which is a kind of an environmental anthropological study. But if he had gone ahead and done a cloud busting PhD, they would have knocked him off for sure. Um, and the U.S. government suppressed other governments using cloud busting. Like Eritrea had very good effects for about, I think it went on over about 5 years, the cloud busting, and they got pushback from Western governments, and the US stopped suppressed interest from. I think there was 2 Israeli prime ministers that showed an interest in orgonomy. They wanted to get an ambassador to visit Organon, and I think Ben Gurion was one of them, and so that was suppressed too. But the nowadays, I don't think you could do any masters or PhDs that were not within the conventional field. In the West, maybe outside of the West you could, but
do you think, and I guess like this is my next question going along with that, like the fact of like, they're not even letting you do it. Do you think they're practicing it themselves and using it like heavily? And maybe they don't want people to realize or realize that and realize actually maybe how easily it could be for anybody to do it.
The British government does have cloud busters, and I don't. Well, they did have in the 80s, and at an Air Force base, and there was a hurricane in the 80s, which I think was caused by the Air Force using cloud busters not very well, or using them sort of inappropriately, because as in that film, the Earth versus Flying Saucers, that's based on cloud busting, because Reich it showed that you could affect because UFOs run on some kind of ether or orgone field. If you point a cloud buster at a UFO, it makes it wobble. And so that was the effect they used in that film. And I think the Royal Air Force set up some cloud busters so that they could use that effect, presumably. And maybe some general thought, oh, there's nothing to it, let's just put them all on full blast. And there is, because you usually only get hurricanes in tropical areas, and there was a tropical hurricane that hit the UK in the late 80s, and that's totally not supposed to happen. And some weather presenter got it in the neck because he didn't foresee it, but there's no way he could have foreseen it. He just got unfairly blamed, because I suspect that was a military cloudbuster op. But on the whole, I don't, because you got an ether, and all secondary energies have ether behind it, or so there's. I suspect governments use more electrical methods of changing the ether, because the natural kind of cloud busting methods are more. They're more like acupuncture, whereas I think the weather modification using electrical fields is a bit more like sort of just bludgeoning the atmosphere with a club, or sort of making the sort of setting up microwave fields over a certain area and making the ether go crazy in that area and setting off negative effects. So I don't think they're interested in the like healing um, it's a kind of almost therapeutic effects of using cloudbusters properly. They're more interested in just electrical effects of manipulating. I suspect if you throw a load of electricity at the ether in a certain way, you can affect the how the ether interacts with the weather. So I do think they use weather technology, but not. I don't think they use cloudbusters much.
You know,
Perhaps they
it's
do, but
weird. I was reading about something yesterday. I was looking into something I was going to cover with Rash to do with Sidney Gottlieb and stuff with MK Ultra, and I was going through like the CIA site to like look up things under Project Climax. I was trying to look for that project, and tons of things come up, and like it could have the word project or a climax in it, regardless if it's the same thing, and it will just show up. And I was reading something else that was in like that lump of things, and I was like, damn, this is interesting, but it has nothing the fuck to do with this the thing I'm covering. They were talking about how like something with this woodpecker noise that was like picked up on the radio stations, I think on like even ham radios or whatever, like all over the world. And it was like the United States ended up finding out that it was like Russia, and like Russia was like trying to bounce like wavelengths up and down against something in the sky and back.
Like pinging.
Yes, like pinging something, and but it was like talking all this science shit. I'm like, what the fuck are they pinging? But it was just like really weird, and like I'm just wondering, like again, like are they pinging or bouncing? Who knows? Like I don't know. It's just like now that reading that has and listening to you made me really just like, what the hell was really going on? Like that's weird.
yeah, I think they've done all sorts of like the Russians have known about sort of 5G effects since the 1950s and earlier. Like they were talking about microwave illness back in the 50s, and they sometimes would beam what would be 4G and 5G now at the American embassy, and the ambassadors would get ill, and
Wow.
and so they've been ahead in a lot of sort of the interaction between electricity and the torsion field or the orgone field. They, they, they've been aware of that for decades. So they might have been trying some kind of psychological effect by creating certain frequencies bouncing up and down the stratosphere. Uh, the there's an interaction between electrical and orgone ether. Or I've heard of that. The woodpecker.
Yeah, because I think they said it was like they did it like 8 to something amount of times, like per whatever. So it actually sounded like a constant, like like coming up like this clicking, knocking sound. And
Yeah.
really weird. I'll be totally honest with you. And I hate to say, like, I do question sometimes, like, even this QAnon crap. I mean, they got people like praising Putin. It's like, yo, it's like, how do you know that country ain't like into some really serious, like, deep occulted science? And we're just, praising them because QAnon said so.
Yeah.
Or him and Trump are going to save the world. It's like, how do you know, like, what's really going on over there? What are they really testing? Like, I mean, I don't know.
Well, sometimes I wonder if we've got like 2 or 3 different world orders that are vying for supremacy. Like the Russian sort of state can be quite authoritarian. That they sort of had vaccine mandates at one point in certain parts of Russia, and China. But people say, "Oh, China's just owned by the New World Order." I'm not sure about that. They're surrounded by U.S. bases, and they're nationalists. They're not globalists. They're very authoritarian, but
I've actually thought it's just like like someone. It's really us over there pulling the strings, but blaming them.
yeah. I mean,
It's like we're the puppet master of China, but we're blaming the puppet, not the fucking thing, controlling.
I suspect that China's playing along to get what it can, but because they believe in the kind of supremacy of the Chinese state, and they'll do anything to have a strong national state. I don't think they're after. I, my guess is we got like a satanic world order, a BRICS world order, and perhaps a Christian fundamentalist Trumpian world order that's behind some of the military. So I don't think China, and even within the BRICS, China and Russia have different ways of doing things. Russia's authoritarian, but not as technocratic as China, and it's difficult because the perhaps if the technocratic Chinese state was in a world that was not trying to destroy it, it might loosen up a bit. But I'm not sure if the Satanists who have been behind, or the Dark Order in the West, and the Chinese state are on board with each other. I think perhaps it's just because China's authoritarian and a technocracy, but they've been extremely nationalist for centuries in China, a huge sort of single state for millennia virtually. So I think we've got a few different world orders going on, and I suspect that the Russians do have some advanced technology. I mean, even one time back in when I was doing the MSc in orgone and acupuncture, I got help from a research center in Kansas, and there was a Russian physicist there at the time, and she had this like wand device, and it was like this white wand, and she could just run it over your arm, and all the acupuncture points would sparkle with lightning between the wand and your arm. It didn't hurt, but it was really weird. You could see like lightning going from the wand to the acupuncture point. And I've heard that the Russians have technology where they can switch off electrical fields in an area. Say, like if a boat goes into somewhere where they don't want it to go, or that they can switch off all the electrical fields in there, like UFOs can do, and that would, yeah, and that would be some type of orgone technology.
I wanted to ask real quick, what type of, I guess, stuff is used for acupuncture needles?
Generally steel needles. So it's acupuncture is door busting and orgone energizing in the same process.
So I was going to ask, does that metal happen to work with orgone?
Yeah, it's the same process, because if you put a steel needle in an acupuncture point, you can get silver and gold plated needles too. I don't think I've ever used them, but I've heard they're silver is calming and gold is energizing, but generally it's steel, medical grade steel used for acupuncture points. But when you put a needle in, it's like a cloud buster in the body. So you're doing cloud busting. If you're getting rid of negative energy, cloud busting. And if you're drawing energy into the channel, you're orgone accumulating. So it's the same energy. Orgone and chi are the same thing.
So if you're getting acupuncture, are you actually cloud busting yourself?
Yeah.
You're moving the dead energy. You're trying to clear. Yeah. Makes sense.
I mean, it also works. It's very clever acupuncture, because it automatically changes between cloud busting and orgone energizing. So it's an intelligent system. So it can swap. Like say if you get headaches and you got a red face, and you're really overcharged, and you think too much, and um, then say if you'd maybe put acupuncture points here and here and here, maybe a couple ear points, um, and that would be cloud busting equivalent. But say if someone was really tired and stressed out, and and use some points in the legs to boost their energy, or on their abdomen, that would be like orgone energizing, and the body automatically will go from one to the other, or even do both at the same time. So it's really sophisticated. There's nothing. It's the most Chinese medicine's the most sophisticated.
Imagine that. Imagine that's what all invoking and banishing is in magic.
Mm.
Well, it's what you do in meditation too, and like yoga practice is the same thing.
Mm.
And exercise in general.
This almost makes me even like with just that description. It was even like, I know it sounds funny. It's even almost like the hourglass. It's like you're almost like kind of taking something and then bringing it in, and then like it's hard, funneling an energy into a fine point and then letting it out somewhere else.
Yeah, yeah.
Really interesting. I think we're about an hour and 40 minutes in now. I think maybe we can wrap it up here. I'd actually probably like to have discussions with you more in the future, maybe a little bit more specific on a few things. So I'm sure I would really like to talk to you again. This was an amazing episode. This was some wild stuff. Thank you, Leon.
It's so cool.
This was really amazing for me just to talk about and talk about some of the stuff I said, and to hear the shit you had to say. Amazing. Thank you.
I really enjoyed it.
No, hell, so did I. So did I. Do you want to let everybody know where they can find your stuff again? I know you have a bunch.
Sure. There's my blog, which is leonsouthgate.blogspot.com, and if you go back a couple of blog posts, I've got a page of links to the different places, and psychorgone.com is the best place for my main articles and more academic stuff. So from those 2 points, you can get onto my YouTube and other places.
Yeah, I got all of your links in the bottom now. Like I said before, people want to find a way to reach out to the man. His Twitter is in there in case there was any other podcasts listening as well. There is a way to contact him. You can hit him up on Twitter. Thank you again so much, my man. That was just like truly like really amazing. It was some wild stuff. And
thanks. Yeah, you got some interesting like sort of angles that we veered off on. That
yeah. Like it was fun that you entertained some of my silly ideas.
No, it was all pertinent.
That's what's up. That's what made it fun too. It's like maybe I'm not that crazy. Maybe I knew about Orgone the whole time, just didn't know what it was called.
No, I think so. People have a natural affinity for the way Orgone functions, because it's like the base of the universe, really.
Some wild stuff. It's like the fabric of everything, right? Teresa, would you like to let everybody know where they can find?
Sure. Well, thank you. Thanks, Leon. That was really interesting. I have like a list of like 3 or 4 other questions, but it would take like another hour to probably answer all those.
Well, that's why we're going to have them on again.
Yeah, exactly. So thank you so much. If people want to hear more from me, please come check out the Spiritual Gangsters on all major podcast platforms, YouTube, Rumble, and they can find me on Instagram and Twitter.
Awesome.
Real
quick, Leon, have you gone on Inner Guardians? Have they hit you up?
I haven't. No, I'll check. I'll check Inner Guardians out.
No, well, besides that, because I wasn't sure if he's gotten in contact with you. He could have recorded with you. I have no idea. But I do want to at least give a shout out to people listening. Definitely go check out the Amos Inquisition. He was on there as well. So if people want to hear more of Leon, go check him out on there. and I definitely plan on having him on again. Maybe we'll make him our resident mad scientist on the Occult Reject.
Yes,
Oh,
I love it.
yeah, that's always been my ambition.
Yeah. Well, there you go, man. Thank you. I really, truly had a blast. This was really enlightening. It's made me think about so much stuff. And like Teresa was saying, this is just going to, I'm sure, bring you on other times with specific questions. Great work. I appreciate everything you brought to the table and your honesty about your work as well. And again, Teresa, thank you so much for coming on and co-hosting and asking questions. Everybody in the chat, thank you. That is what's up. We had a bunch of people chiming in, asking questions, leaving their opinion. I loved it, and I loved this topic. And thank you all for jumping in. That's why I do this. And until the next one, everybody be well. Later.